thank you everyone to be here. We are so much people. I'm impressed and I'm so happy that Peppi works. As Dieter said, I'm Pauline Dujardin. I'm a legal counselor at Cresus. Cresus is an NGO in France, and we are almost the only big NGO which is really, which really make, I would say, almost just debt advice in France. Because in France, debt advice is made by NGO. I will get it a little bit later. But it's NGO which have many activities. For example, it's consumer organization, it's, for example, familial organization, and we in Cresus, we just do debt advice. So, Noel, please, the next slide. I don't see the next slide.
Okay, and can everybody else see the next slide?
Yes.
Okay.
That's not so bad. I just have to know in which side you are.
Okay, 3 of 19.
Okay,
Yes?
great.
Yeah.
Great. So when I say next, you do, and then I do in my computer. Sorry for that.
Okay.
So what are activities of debt counselor in France? So in many countries, debt counselor will do some budget analysis to know what the problem is and what the solution is. In the solution, we can propose budget support in time, because it's really important to follow the beneficiary in his budget management. Eventually, and we do that in Cresus, negotiation of debt. We do some negotiation with, I would say, common debts like rent or energy bills, but also we negotiate some credit with creditors. And eventually, it depends of the situation of the beneficiary. We make some support on the insolvency procedure here in France. So we help the beneficiary to construct the file, and then we explain him the different step of the procedure in the time. Next slide, please. So the question is today, why is professionalization needed for debt advice? We have to have in mind that the debt advice and debt counseling can really have some important effect on the beneficiary situation, on his financial situation. That's logical, that's what we do. But when we advise someone, it can also have big impact on his private life. So what I want to say is professionalization is really important, because the counsel we give can really have big impact of the beneficiary situation. So we can just say, oh, I think that you can do that. And we have to know all the consequences of these choices. What's important is in the professionalization is to the confidentiality obligation. If we want that beneficiary really trust the debt advice, he has to know and he has to be sure that all that he say would be confidential. So when we have somebody with a labor contract, the employer can, for example, make sanction when the debt advisor misconduct. That's really, that's a little bit funny that I said that, because in my organization, in Cresus, we have both. We are an hybrid organization, so we have employee and we have volunteers. I can say to you that the confidentiality obligation is respected by the volunteers too. But we always want that we have a volunteer and an employee to be sure that there is no misconduct of them. That's too a responsibility matter and an insurance matter, because as I said, the advice we give are really important and can have important effect of the beneficiary situation. So we have an insurance in case of miscounseling, and you can't benefit of this insurance if you are not professional. Next step, please. What is interesting on the French model is that unlike many countries, but perhaps like your countries, we don't have any debt counseling certification or degree, and it's not a recognized profession. So I can't give you the formal and the official training and certification of the debt advice because it doesn't exist. But originally, this debt counseling was done by social workers in France. Then we had, and we have still, many independent profession in this field of debt counseling. But for this independent profession, it's not free of charges for the beneficiary. And now we can say that's mainly the NGO which give some free of charges advice on the budget and on the debt matter. What it's important when you are an NGO and when you don't have any degree and really training of debt counseling, it's the multidisciplinarity. You will see that I will show user organization in many NGO in France which don't have a specialized debt advisor in just that matter, but work with many professionals which will give a stone in the organization of the services. Next slide, please. So what I said is, without certification of debt counseling, the qualification of debt counselor, or which must be present in debt counseling services, are various. So in our organizations, I don't say just in Cresus, but in organizations which make debt counseling, we have some social worker, some psychologist, some former banker. I think former banker, it's really in Cresus, and legal counselor. And I will show you why each of this profession, each professional is important to make a real good services of debt counseling. Next slide, please. So we have an almost French certification. It's a CESF, so it's a counselor in familial and social economy. That's a state certification, but that's more or less a generalist social worker training. So we have few hours about budget support, but we have information about, I don't know what, how a family can live in a good way. So it depends really of the structure in which the social worker, so this CESF, will do his practical internship and his structure in which he works. So it's almost, and you will see that's really the heart of my presentation. We learn when we work, because we work together with all professionals. Next slide, please. As I said, the first person in a debt advice services will be the social workers. Why the social workers is important in those services? It's because he has the perfect knowledge of the social aid and state's dispositive environment. Because when we do the budget of a person, the first question is, do you get any help that you could, so you have the right to get? Because, you know, in France, we have, I can say, pretty much social aid, but it's really hard to know what it's existing. It's state's help, is it department social aid or regional? So the social workers has a training to find and to know all these aids. these social workers are specialized on social inclusion matter, what is really the heart of our activities, and it has specific competencies in budget support. I said it to you, it's the only professional, so only certification, CESF, which have a few hours of training recognized by the state in budget support. But it don't mean that each social worker will really know how to deal with a lot of debt. And for example, all this social worker won't know how works the insolvency procedure in France. Next slide, please. Then one of the most important professional in debt advice services is legal counselor. Yes, I smile because I'm the legal counselor. But it's really important to have at least one person in the structure which have a real big legal bachelor or degree, because we are here to counsel people, so beneficiaries, about their rights. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, our action can have really much big impact, and we have to know what the right of the beneficiaries are. We can assisting them to the insolvency procedure. I would say that a social worker can do that in normal procedure. But in this procedure, sometimes you have legal problems. Could you contest this decision or not? If it's interesting to contest or not. So, for example, I am the legal counselor on Cresus, and all the volunteers and employees in Cresus can call me and present me a case just to have the legal information about this case. The legal counselor can help too on the status of the debt of beneficiary. As you know, when the creditor, so in France, and I think in many legal systems, in France, the creditor can ask the reimbursement of the debt in a special time. For example, it's 10 years when you have a justice decision, and that's really legal matter, which are really not easy. So we have to know, and we have to say to beneficiary, yes, this letter of the creditor, it's just nothing because it can't go to court. Or, oh no, this letter, it can do some enforcement proceeding. So it's another way and another reason why it's really important to have a legal counselor in the team. When the statutes of the NGO allows it, it's not possible in each association in France. For example, us Cresus, we don't have the status, but some legal counselor of association can go before court with beneficiaries to represent them and to assist them as a lawyer, but it's just for recognized NGO. And then the legal counselor will train all the workers of the structure to legal frame and their evolution. What I always say to my volunteers and people which are working with me, it's, I don't want to make you a legal counselor. It's not your job, it's not your competence. What I want to do is to make some red flag, and that you know that in this situation, it could be a legal problem, and then you call the legal counselor of the structure, so me. Next slide. What can be really interesting too in a structure of debt advice, because of the psychosocial risk for the debtor to their situation, is to have a team or a psychologist in the structure. Why? Because it will help the colleagues and the counselor to deal with psychosocial problems of debtors, perhaps better talk with them. It can help debt counselor to deal with the psychological effects of the hard situations they deal. For example, here we do a monthly meeting with one psychologist of our structure just to speak about what case we dealt and how we did and how we have to do not to be so stressed because of those situations. Psychologists will too help colleague and salary when a beneficiary is in emergency psychological situation. As you know, in the matter we deal, it can happen that a debtor say to us, I just want to suicide, I just want to end my life because it's too hard. So it's really important to have someone who would have the key to speak to them and to explain them, no, don't do that, and who could you go to speak about your problem. It's really important too when people have some psychological problem, for example, for gambling problems, and it can really transfer them to perhaps another association to be helped with the psychological matter. And the last thing we make here in Cresus is this discussion group of debtors. It's really important for us to organize some discussion group because debtor will speak about their problems with people having the same problem, having a similar situation. And it's really important to them to know that they are not alone in this situation. And their situation is not ended, because we ask some beneficiary which are in better situation with our accompaniment and with the insolvency procedure to testify and to say, yes, you did the first step, and the first step is really the hardest. It's to ask from help. Next slide. Here in Cresus, and I think it can be really interesting to have, we have a former banker which are working with us as an employee. We always say that they want to buy another conscious because of their previous life. And it's really interesting to have some former banker because they have specific and operating knowledge in the functioning of the bank. For example, sometimes a bank counselor will say, yes, I can't do that. And our former banker can say, no, it's not possible. He can, he just don't want. So it's really interesting to have their point of view, which know how it works in a bank. That's really important for us because we are doing some debt negotiation. There is a certification for credit intermediation. It's IOBSP. I don't really say it in English. And they can negotiate credits with the creditors. And they are trained normally in banking systems explanation. Next slide, please. I think when we are debt counselor, we have to deal with emergency situation and over-indebtedness situation, but that's really important to make some prevention. And that's why we think that it's really important to have someone which have a certification of educator in general, but which will work in financial literacy. So you see the little picture. In Cresus, we did develop a board game to explain how budget works. So we think that in a structure and for this pluridisciplinarity we already talked, it's really interesting to have someone with the training competencies with youth of or less youth people, which have a good knowledge on the budget ecosystem and have pedagogic skills. I think that not each person can teach budget and teach financial education, because that's a real hard matter, and it's really skills can to speak about budget without to be judgmental and without to be boring. Next slide, please. As you see, when here in France we don't have any real certification in debt advice, we are really gambling on the pluridisciplinarity, because we really think that each person in the services can help the other. So but we have to, when you have so much different skills and competencies, it's really important to have a clear and pragmatic process in the structure, because it's important that each beneficiary receives the same help everywhere. If he's in Cresus here in Strasbourg, or in Toulouse, or in Bordeaux, it's important that he has some same help. And making a clear and pragmatic process in the structure, in the client treatment, it's ensure a clear way of conduct for the debt advisor, so he will be sure that he didn't forget a step, and it permits to have the same counsel everywhere. Just to present it, in Cresus we have a process which is the same, I think, as other NGOs which are doing budget counseling. So first we have to make a budget analysis and a budget diagnostic. The person is over indebted, or perhaps it's just budget management. With this budget diagnostic, we will determine the available money each month to eat, to make some plans, to make some activities. And then when we have this available money each month, we are making recommendation. Is it budget support, legal procedure as insolvency procedure, for example, or perhaps it's just credit negotiation. But in each recommendation, what important is that we have to support the beneficiary in the time. We always say to our beneficiaries that we don't have any limit in our support, because it's important to explain what the people must do, but it's important to make some control is not perhaps the term, but to be sure that the people will respect it, and when it's not possible for the beneficiary, perhaps making another recommendation. Next slide, please. What's important is the quality standards to this pluridisciplinarity team. So what's important is a non-judgmental and pragmatic services. Someone said to me, what I liked with the Cresus support is that it was not, I didn't feel like judged, like they judged my way of life, and it was really pragmatic. So like an accountant, it's cipher. In quality standards, we have the free services for the beneficiary. It doesn't mean that no one can pay, because we have to live, we have to pay some salary. So the free services must be for the beneficiary, but can be financed and funded. We will have another webinar about it, by state subvention, for example, but even by economic sector. Here in Cresus, some banks are making us some gift to help our action. In each structure, we have to have an ethics code, and I think the most important is the training and the information of debt advisor. We are dealing with big problem, and we have to help people with knowing what we do and what the consequences will be. Next slide, please. I wanted to share about the minimum skills, so the good knowledge of the financial system, the empathy, which is different with the pity, the active listening, so always listening to people and even rephrase what he said to be sure to touch him, and the goodwill. Next slide, please. So, as I said, we don't have any training, I won't say degree at the University of Debt Qualification, but we are many structures which help to the training of the debt counselor. So first we have the Banque de France, that's the financial inclusion state organism, which will make some training session on demand of the NGO. And we have a website of the state, Mes Questions d'Argent, and you can find here some resources to help beneficiary, to some video, some presentation. Les Clés de la Banque is the website of the Banking Federation in the education field. I will show you a little screenshot. And Cresus, because all the point of the pluridisciplinarity I speak about since the beginning of the presentation is the training in intern is really important, that each worker can train another worker because they don't have the same skills. So the internal training will permit to benefit of skills of each professional. Next slide, please. So here you see I make some screenshots. On the left, Mes Questions d'Argent and Les Clés de la Banque, that's internet resources from state organism and banking federation organism. And on the right, you see that that's the intranet of the Cresus website, and we give for all workers and all volunteers some practical letter to explain what's the legal frame of this question of enforcement proceedings, for example, or the insolvency procedure. And then on the last screenshot is a video. We make some monthly training session in Visio to permit us to touch everyone, and we record this training session. So all the workers and volunteers in Cresus can be formed and trained and when you want. Next slide, please. So that's more or less what I said with the technical meeting in Cresus every month. So it can be legal training, psycho training, banking practice training. And that's what I really want to say today. This pluridisciplinarity permit to all the team to be involved in every matter. And last slide, please. To finish, I wanted to make a recommendation about the French situation and what I think would be the best situation. So system in France is really interesting because every counselor must be involved in the training of the other. So we have each skills in our structure, and we can make an appeal to each professional for each problem. But we can't deny that there is a lack of an uniformized certification which allow beneficiaries to have the same services with each debt advisor in France, not in each Cresus, but in each NGO which gives some debt advice. So we really think that it would be interesting, perhaps not to have just a training at the university for 2 years, but to have a certification postgraduate, because each person would have his first training, I'm legal counselor, and then to have this specialty of debt advising. And I thank you. It's the end of the presentation, and if you have some question, I'm open to it.